The blue war crown of ancient Egypt, striking fear into the hearts of the ancient world. Welcome back to my channel, where we dive into the fascinating world of my weird dreams and how they relate to ancient civilizations. In today's episode, we're going to explore the enigmatic blue war crown of ancient Egypt. No examples of the blue war crown nor any other of the royal crowns has actually ever been discovered. But we do have many statues, we have lots of wall paintings and that sort of thing of this beautiful crown. But is it actually a crown, or is it just a headdress? This particular aspect is debatable, but for the purpose of this episode, we're going to just call it a crown, because it was worn by the royal as a symbol of their power. This crown was stunning in colour and extremely unusual in shape. You might say the others are pretty unusual in shape too. But what is it about the blue crown? Well, the blue crown was known as the Khepresh, and it was a distinctive headdress worn by the pharaohs during times of battle. But this was mainly during the New Kingdom period, and after that, apparently until the Kushites. Look, I don't know anything about that era, the Kushite era, but because that time was way after my time, but that's what the Egyptologists say. But why was it a special crown for war? The royal crowns essentially weren't particularly suitable for any form of exertion because they were lightweight, delicate, and due to their size and complexity, they'd actually been quite difficult to balance while active. Although I must say, looking at Nama's artwork, it looks like he seemed to be pretty good at it. He could do all kinds of things in his various crowns. But hey, he seemed to be good at everything, didn't he? The blue crown certainly was different. It was easy to balance and it was well padded for protection. I guess it was a bit like a primitive motorcycle helmet. The earliest examples of the blue crown are found during the Second Intermediate period. But the majority of the depictions of the crown are actually during the New Kingdom and afterwards. So there's a reasonable length of time when it was used. Some Egyptologists believe it evolved from the lesser interesting cap crown, and I agree with this concept. And based on my dream regressions of ancient Egypt, I can tell you why. I think it might surprise you, or not maybe. It's actually all about the safety of the pharaoh. Let me start by explaining what the crown was made of, and then you'll understand why. The inside was made from a heavy, sort of matting-like material. It could have been a form of moss. It kind of looked mossy, but it was thicker and heavier than you'd expect moss to be. But it was some kind of dried out, heavy kind of matting material. But on the outside was a carefully shaped, woven crown, much in the same manner as the other crowns that we've discussed. So it was woven and shaped. The inside was also a woven crown, but it looked very much like the skull cap that we referred to earlier. The god Ptah wore one of these skull caps, so it's quite easy to see the general shape if you look at some of his statues. I'm going to try my hand at drawing what I'm going to describe in terms of what these war crowns were made of. Let's start with a piece of plant fibre, which we roll around into a ring, and we flatten that ring out. Then we get some really fine fibre that's sort of like cotton thin, and we create a bunch of it, and we push it through the ring. Next step is to pull it around the ring and then bunch it back together. So you've got the fibre going up through the ring, round, and back down the outside of the ring. So what it then looks like is kind of a little lifesaver kind of round thing with lots of strings around it. These things have to hold the three component parts of the crown together. So that outer layer, which is the shapely, beautiful crown that then gets painted the blue colour. The middle layer, which is that buffer layer, and the inner layer, which is the skull cap. The end result is the front looks like these little round circular disc things, and the inside or back of it looks like a series of soft knots. Let's take a closer look at some of these statues so you can get a feel for what it looked like. The outside was painted with some sort of blue chalky substance. The challenge was to create an item that was beautiful, lightweight, well, relatively speaking, stable on the head, and provide the pharaoh with some safety if they were to fall on their head or be struck there. As for the shape of this helmet kind of crown, the origins of the shape of the helmet are not an African hairstyle, as has been described by one of the creators who I greatly admire, but I just want to disagree just from one perspective. So I will play you an extract from an episode by this creator with the credits given to them, and so you can see what I'm talking about. So the creator I'm referencing is called Mr Imhotep, and the episode is called The Crown That Proves That Ancient Egypt Was Black.
Here is a traditional hairstyle from Central East African tribes and that survived colonization. It's called the Amasunzu hairstyle. It's obvious that its shape is identical to the Khepresh. So, was the Khepresh inspired by a traditional African hairstyle? Maybe.
I just loved this theory, but it's actually the other way around. The hairstyle was as a result of the royal crown, not vice versa. A person of status would have this hairstyle to show a link back to the successful royals who would be wearing the crowns in ancient times. And it's kind of nice to know that that beautiful design does live on in one way or another. An African hairstyle based on the crowns of African pharaohs does make sense. And yes, these were African pharaohs with African features. And if you don't believe me from my dream regressions, just look at the statues. They tell everything. I'm not saying that all the pharaohs were African. What I'm saying is that sometimes African people ruled Egypt, and sometimes it was more Mediterranean people. And this is partly due to the wars and the various conquering and intermarrying that took place. So to put it down as one general rule on either side is actually completely wrong. But I can confirm that the earliest of the ancient Egyptians, in particular, it is particularly obvious regarding the ones living in Upper Egypt, they were definitely very dark-skinned. They were African, 100%, without a doubt. Back to the subject of the shape and styling of the crown. As with the other crowns that I've discussed in previous episodes, it was shaped to cover the contours of the hairline. This is because royal hair, and to some extent other people's hair, was kept covered. Before we go back to the blue crown, I'd like to talk about hair a little bit because hair and crowns kind of go together. And these are some of the assumptions I've made based on what I've seen in my dream regressions. So they're things that I am assuming from what I've seen. Anyway, even children often had their heads shaved. And for boys, it was just partially. And as soon as adulthood was reached, they could, if they wanted to, grow their hair, but it seemed important that it was covered. It was believed that shaving the head strengthened the body against disease. It also prevented control being exerted over a person, either physically or by magic. They had many strange beliefs regarding hair, but it's clear that it did in fact work to keep lice at bay. So having a bald head in that way did minimize some illnesses. Those who chose to keep their own hair would often have it removed and made into a wig at some point in their life when they were ill and were trying to get their health and their strength back. To me, now, in today's world, it just doesn't seem logical that removing one's hair could prevent magic being done to you. Not just because I don't necessarily believe in magic, but also because if the hair you're susceptible to from magic is cut off, then why keep it and use it as part of your own wigs? Surely that same hair could be used, could be taken and turned into some kind of spell. Or maybe I just don't understand how Egyptian magic works. But it doesn't make sense, and yet to them it seemed to make perfect sense. So the hair being a risk to you only if it's still attached to you, and it's not a risk to you if it's not attached to you. I don't know. I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it now. If anyone is watching this and has a knowledge of magic and could explain this to me, that would be really great. So essentially, the royals and the nobles almost always had their hair covered. Even if they had their own hair, it was covered by a crown or a wig or something of that kind. It tended only to be the common person who would be most likely to have their own natural hair on display. And the ancient Egyptians would also use hair as a method of control over their prisoners. This is one of those unpleasant topics that I'm not going to go into any depth in because it's not very nice. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but I'll just make that comment, and you can see it in a lot of their artwork. The blue crown was usually adorned with the cobra at the front, and that was a symbol of protection and divine power. But I'm not going to talk about that at the moment. The story of the cobra symbol is another story, which I have had a number of dreams about, and so I'll need to get into that in another episode. The use of the colour blue for the war crown was significant, as blue was a very difficult colour for any of the opposing factions to ever create, and hence its uniqueness made it even more stunning. Some theorise that it represented the Nile River, but I say no. It was a colour no one else could create. It stood out, and it was incredibly beautiful. But there's one more thing about it being blue, and this is really important. By wearing the blue war crown, the pharaoh was aligning himself with the god Osiris, the blue god. Even the design of the crown looks like a shortened, stylized version of the Atef crown of Osiris. Now, I don't like the concept of war, and I never have, both in this waking world that I live in and in my dream regression world. But I have to say, at least occasionally, there are beautiful things that come from war, like these incredible creations. It's sad that no crowns remain, but I guess it would be pretty unbelievable if they had, considering what they're made of. I hope you enjoyed my perspective on this item of Egyptian history. Remember, please, that I'm only trying to piece together the things I've seen in these weird dream regressions that I've had all my life. There's so much that I've seen in the dreams. Some things I can make sense of, like this, and other things I'm still trying to work out. I'd like to think that maybe some of these small mysteries of ancient Egypt can be resolved, and that I can help to give that extra few bits of information to solve what was the Blue Crown, for example, and various other things with what I've seen in my dream regressions. I live in hope that as Egyptologists continue to unravel the mysteries of ancient Egypt, they will start to prove more and more of the things that I've said and all the things I've seen. But as for the Blue War Crown, I can say it was incredibly beautiful, and it stands out as a testament to the ingenuity of this extraordinary civilization. That's all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, just please consider giving it maybe a like or a share or even subscribing to my channel, because there's lots more content to come. And thank you so much for watching.